Hello and welcome to the Anyone Can Play Guitar podcast,
which gives you, the listener, a series of hints and pointers on your journey as a musical artist.
Providing you with interviews from those in the music industry, along with our own experiences.
Ben and James shine some light on the many pitfalls and opportunities that being a musician has to offer.
In the previous episode, we met with one of the most recognisable voices in UK radio, Mark Radcliffe, where we covered the value of radio, demos, Glastonbury, and what draws him to folk music. This week, we head to a familiar place for many musicians, the pub, where we meet Ross Millard from the Futureheads for part one of a two-part episode. Here we discuss forming a band, practice, being honest, and band manifestos.
Welcome to episode 3 with me, Ben, and him,
James.
Episode 3 of the triple header launch, James.
Yes, indeed.
A new thing we decided recently.
Yes, well, we didn't cover that in the introductory episode.
No,
because we weren't sure when things were going to get approved by the various people who need to approve these things to go into podcast land.
And they were a lot more efficient than I thought.
They were pretty rapid.
I heard 2 weeks, it was 8 hours.
Yeah, well, it varied from one to the other, but it was pretty quick.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, here we are, episode 3. And this episode is a double header. So, a little bit this week. Come back for more next week.
Absolutely.
And this is, so far, I mean, I'm going to sound like Bruce Forsyth here, but this is one of my favourites. Because they all are. But this was the first longer conversation we had with someone.
That's true. Ross had a decent amount of time on his hands, didn't he? And he had firstly, he wasn't just about to do a show.
Yes.
Or we weren't sort of trying to grab some of his time, like in amongst doing other things. So that was sort of good in that sense, that we could sort of sit down and have a little bit longer, which transpired, because we weren't necessarily planning on doing 2 episodes out of this, were we?
No, but that was just how it kind of landed.
We had enough content that we thought, right, we don't want to have a 2-hour episode, because that would be pretty ridiculous.
Yes.
But it's sort of split into 2 nice halves.
Logical chunks.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this episode, it felt more like, it literally was a chat at the pub with Ross, but it actually felt like the chat at the pub, because you're right at the backstage with Paul or Mark. They were just about to go on stage. They'd just done a sound check. They were travelling that day. This was more like I didn't feel like I was stealing some of their time, which I didn't really feel like with Paul and Mark, but they were working, weren't they?
I know what you mean. Yeah. It was good. And what I've found in terms of re-listening to this is that I was definitely sitting further away from the microphone than you and Ross.
Yes, yeah.
Which, well, it's all part of the learning curve, I guess.
It is. I don't think
I think you've done that strategically, actually, to get me a little bit further.
No, I did feel a bit sorry for Ross, though, because it felt like it was an interview. Well, it was an interview, but like a job interview where we were both either side of him. So why have you applied for this job, Ross? But there's a lot we're covered in both episodes here. The first episode is kind of an introduction to Ross, the Futureheads, how they got started, how they practiced, how they got together. When you and I were in a band, it was in university. Maxime got together around university-ish time as well. This was kind of like at school when there were school kids, collegey, went into university as well. So that was good. I
found it interesting how they came to form a band in the first place and what that involved. And then it was quite good tracking sort of Ross's sort of career, if you like, I guess, from the point where he first picked up a guitar and to getting together, and the first time he thought, I could actually form a band, that this could be a thing, I could start doing this properly, and then how they transitioned into doing it like properly, I would sort of say, and then charting that through, and then we'll go through into part 2 where it then talks more about I'm waving my hand here,
you are
the future.
I think that's where Tenerife is. So well, enjoy the first half of the Ross Millard double header, and we'll speak to you very shortly. So from my point of view, one of the first things I wanted to talk about was, because I was the guitarist in our band, like yourself, how did you start with the guitar? Was it something you just picked up, or?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of have this very sort of vivid moment, because I suppose over the years sort of talked about it a little bit, with various people about picking up the guitar, but when the Beatles anthology was broadcast for the first time on like British telly, I think I must have been about 14 or 15, and it felt like TV that you'd never seen before. You know, I knew a lot of the music, and at the time I was really, really into a lot of music, especially British music, because it was sort of just, I guess, just slightly before the whole kind of Britpop explosion that series was broadcast. You know, and they just made it seem so simple, and so, you know, watched that programme, got on a classical guitar. My dad bought it off his mate at work for my birthday. Like I say, it was probably 1995 or something like that, you know, 96 maybe.
Yeah, I think Freeze a Bird was around about 95. That was about the same time as anthology stuff.
That's right, yeah. So got that in the summer, one year for my birthday. The guy who sold it came round once to kind of show us a few chords and sort of find out what music I was interested in learning, which at the time was, you know, probably Nevermind and the first Oasis records, I've got to be honest, and maybe Automatic for the People. They were probably the top three at the time for me, and learned a few chords and just obsessed over it from there. Had a few mates at school who were tinkering around with other things at the time, you know, a little bit of drums, a couple of other guitarists, and just squirreled ourselves away for a few years and just tried to learn what we could. But it wasn't until I went to college a couple of years later that I actually met other lads who made it seem quite possible to form a band, put a band together and start playing gigs. You know?
That was Chris for us, wasn't it? Chris Ledge. He, because I still don't think to this day that Simon realised he was in the band, because he was the only bass player we knew. So he was like, do you just fancy playing it? I don't think he actually to this day wanted to be in the band. I
think that must be a typical story, you know, because it's the first band that I ever actually played in as well. The lad who ended up playing the bass he just wanted to be in a band. He couldn't play a note, bought a bass, and you just take it from there, don't you? Do you know what I mean?
Totally.
What would that learning process for you personally look like then? Like, say, you got a guitar, some guy told you, here's a couple of chords, crack on, off you go. What did that look like, you sitting in your room or whatever?
Yeah.
How did you get from that point of not having an absolute clue how this thing works to get to a point where you can actually play it with some level of proficiency?
Yeah, I mean, it's a long journey, isn't it? You know, I think any guitarist out there knows that it doesn't happen overnight. But I mean, this is sort of slightly predating the internet. You know, we definitely didn't have a computer in our house, so it was a case of you could buy these sort of songbooks. You know, Easy Guitar. You know the ones. So, you know, if you can play like 4, 5, 6 chords, and you can pretty much play, well, for a start, all of Oasis back catalogue at the time, without any disrespect. And if you learn tab, you can kind of take it from there. Like, you know, Windows was quite a good place to go and spend your pocket money. You could buy, like, you know, a full, like a record, but like tablature. You know, you'll know yourselves.
That's a local record store.
G Windows to be
still going as well. Thankfully, I'm glad it's still going.
That's true. That is true. And it was just a case of doing that really, and then in that time on a tradition, having mates that played and just swapping little techniques and ideas. And I think I was probably 17 the first time I went to the Bunker in Sunderland. Because we'd heard that there was this place on a Saturday morning, it was like a youth project where you could go at 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning and you could rehearse for free, and there'd be loads of young people there who wanted to play in bands and who did play in bands. So I went down there with Jaff, who ended up playing bass in the Futureheads. We were mates from college. We went down, didn't know anybody else, but there was sort of 25, 30 kids in a couple of rooms, all getting on like a house on fire, all loved really different, interesting music. So you had people into like Nick Drake, Pavement, you know, Smashing Pumpkins, you know, some stuff that we liked, some stuff that we weren't that bothered about, but the thing was, it was exciting, and that was the first moment where it seemed like a tangible kind of chance to put a band together, really, you know.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because when, like I was saying, when Chris came to that practice and put drums to one of our songs, we're like,
it almost came alive in front of you. Yeah, it's like, actually, no, this isn't just me and him in one of our respective bedrooms learning Married with Children, for example, or whatever other Oasis songs that we did on that busking. We did like a little mini busking tour. That was the first thing James and I did. It was quite good, actually. It was quite, any band listening, that's what I'd say do, just to like.
It was a bit of getting over fear of doing it in front of people for the first time.
What, you just went out onto the streets and just started playing?
But we made it this thing with like our mate Dave and our mate Chris, so we kind of went to Keswick, Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester, and it felt like a tour in a little £500 Nova. It was brilliant, actually.
That's it. I think the best feeling on earth when you're in a band is that idea of just leaving your town to go somewhere else to play your tunes, isn't it? You know, that's the kind of, if you can kind of condense it into one kind of moment, that's what it's all about, really, isn't it?
Oh, without a doubt.
So taken from that, you've got this place, like you say, 35 people in the room, all well up for it. How did you go from that point to thinking, well, actually, they're the other 2-3 lads that? What did that look like in terms of getting to the point where actually they're the people on my way? What did that process of forming the band look like?
Well, I mean, it was sort of there was a few sort of coincidences that aligned, really. You know, we did that for a couple of years. We went to that youth project in Sunderland, and it continued every Saturday, just like I was saying before. You know, just to kind of, you'd form a mini band with a few different people every week, and you'd play a few songs. But slowly and surely, you know, that age between 16 and 18 where is quite a kind of crucial point, isn't it, where you sort of other interests start to come into things like university might crop up for some people, jobs in the real world starts to kind of come into it. So by the time I was 18, I got a place doing English literature at Newcastle Uni, but it meant that I was going to stay in the northeast, you know, and a lot of my other immediate mates either didn't go to uni or they also stayed local as well. So by the time I got to 18, the rest of the kids at the bunker had sort of filtered out, really, and what was left was me and Jaff, like I say, who was already a good mate from college, and Barry and Dave Hyde, who'd already been attending that bunker thing for at least a year or 18 months before we went down. And we just got on so well, man, you know, like there are people that you just get attracted to, aren't they, you know, of music taste and just your sensibilities. I'd also say that Pete and Dave Bruce from Field Music were also really active in that little kind of Saturday morning world for a while as well, so it was good, man, you know. We just sort of all met each other for the first time, and it was just that, it's like a little cassette tape club, you know, you just swap in mixtapes and learning about music the whole time. But yeah, it filtered down, there was the 4 of us left, and we basically decided in sort of autumn of the year 2000 that we were going to form a band together, and we would start rehearsing in Barry and Dave's mum and dad's garage.
Right.
Freezing, but like they've got very, very cool mum and dad, do you know what I mean? Like Fred Hyde, amazing record collection, really open to the idea of their lads, you know, doing what they want with their music, really, you know. So it was a great place for us to rehearse and try and put this band together.
How loud was that coming out of his garage? Because I remember we tried that once at my mum's, and there was people at the other end of the street like, what the hell is this racket?
I know. It's a bit of a dream, isn't it, really, if you can get a scenario where you can make that work. I know that if I tried it in my mother's, it would have been hell on that. So we were definitely lucky in that respect. And it felt quite secretive as well, because in Sunderland, I don't know if you sort of know much about Sunderland and the bunker and stuff, but that was really the only rehearsal space that Sunderland had, or does have, really. So if you weren't in there, it didn't really feel like you existed. And so it was quite nice for us to just be in this garage, putting these songs together to try and kind of do a little kind of ambush of a gig at some point when we felt confident enough to do it, you know.
So how did it come around your first gig? Did you just, like, did you know how to start, or did you just go for it?
Well, the first Futureheads one was slightly different because I think for like 2 or 3, maybe 4 years, we'd been, you know, tinkering away, doing other bits and bobs, and the Sunderland scene at the time was quite healthy, you know. There was probably 50 kids every Friday or Saturday going to see bands at the Royalty or the local cricket club that had like a function room that you'd put bands on in. And there were a couple of slightly older people who were already at Sunderland Uni who were booking bands from Leeds and Doncaster and places to come up and play as well. So it was a DIY scene. It was really healthy, that idea of like forming a band and just sort of not necessarily obsessing over technical skills or any level of quality, really, just trying to be something unique. If you were different, then you were accepted in a way. Do you know what I mean? And I feel like at the time, I know it's easy to look back with kind of rose-tinted glasses and stuff, but I feel like at that time, and these bands aren't really anywhere in the annals of history or anything, but every band in that Sunderland scene at that point was very distinct and different from the next, even though we were all knocking about together and dead close.
Yeah. So there's a few things and all that I think it would be really good to delve into some of the detail on in terms of like the practice in general. Like I guess from our point of view, we generally get together at least once a week and practice. That might vary depending on what else we had going on.
Yeah.
What did that look like from a Futureheads perspective in the early days? Like how often would you get together? How long was a session? And I guess what would a typical practice session look like for you guys?
Well, the way that it started out and the way that it eventually became kind of really different things. Okay. But in the beginning, it was quite, I wouldn't say casual, but we were getting together as often as we could, which at the time, given that I was through in Newcastle at uni, and a couple of other lads had day jobs and things like that, we probably managed once or twice a week on either a weekday evening or sometime over the weekend when we do, maybe 3 hours. But it was part of our sort of stupid band philosophy to kind of treat it like a sort of military operation, really, So the idea behind the band was to try and have as much sort of precision and metronomy and kind of different rhythms and things going on as possible. So it felt like a kind of little sort of nerdy experiment at first, really. So it was all about rehearsing certain sections of songs. We'd take like 5 seconds of a song, like a little riff or like a couple of chords or a certain rhythm change, and we just loop it and go over it and over it and over it and over it and over it until it felt tight, until we felt really, really accurate with it. And it was, I think we were all really quite hard on ourselves in the beginning, because when we formed this band, we'd all done plenty of other bands before, but this band, when you're kids, everything seems like a big deal. We were sort of like 17-year-old, and it was dead serious. It was like, right, we're going to really take this seriously now. Not in terms of
that's no bad thing.
The career of the band or doing anything in that regard, just the actual the songs, the sound of the songs themselves are going to be like very, very tight. That was the idea,
I like that. That's part of what I want to get into, because we would never go to like this 5 second period of that song.
I think we did it 3 times. I'm trying to think of the times I did it 3, because there was a bit in one of the songs.
Well, I mean, everyone's got a different methodology, haven't they? And it does sculpt the band. It makes your sound. I think that
we were technical enough as well, because I remember one of those instances was a Great Circumvention, and we couldn't get from the second chorus to the third verse. I remember, Blondie, Maria, and it's got the dum-dum-ch bit.
You're all right.
Like, Rob, can you do this? It sounds like this. Dum-dum-ch. No technical, but he got what I meant.
Uh-huh.
That's as technical as we ever
got.
That's a good thing to get in, because we were terrible at describing to our drummer and bass player what we had in mind. And we'd make a noise, just like Ben said.
Well,
they'd be standing there going, what? How did you guys communicate the ideas in your heads to the rest of the guys in the band?
Well, I mean, I do feel like in them moments it is usually the drummer that's on the chopping block, isn't it? It kind of always starts with the drums, no matter what you're doing, really. And I've seen that look from any band that I've ever done. There's the drummer sat there at the start of a rehearsal when you're working on something new, and there's this sort of slightly frightened glaze comes over the eyes, because it is quite intimidating if someone walks in and says, I've got this riff or I've got this idea for a song, and that person's playing a guitar, because then you've got to communicate what the idea is to the drummer, haven't you? So yeah, I mean, it did help that Barry and Dave were brothers, and that Dave was on the drums, and there was a little bit of a sort of, as long as whoever had the idea could communicate it well enough to Barry, or if it was Barry's idea, then he could say exactly what he thought to Dave, because you know what brothers are like. They just sort of burn through any kind of manners or grace that and it just becomes like war, doesn't it? Pure war.
Yeah.
So I mean, there were definitely times where practice was aggressive, like and a bit uncomfortable and heated and gnarly and a bit of tension. And I think at the time we got on with it because we knew that in the end you get results. I think being 35-year-old bloke sat here thinking back now, I certainly don't rehearse like that now.
No.
Where you're a bit intimidated or it's a bit tense until you get it right. But I do have to say it did work.
I mean, how successful do you think you would have been without that tension, without that, I suppose, brutal honesty almost?
Yeah, I think for us we had to have that sort of in the room. I think we all had to feel like we owed each other to give it everything, because I think the minute that commitment wanes on any level, I think the vision of what the band is sort of dies a little bit, or it would have for us anyway. I think that it was essential that we were really on it with each other all the time.
So once you started getting going and having these regular practices, were you still using that guitar you got from your dad's work, or did you upgrade? I know when I upgraded from my £139 starter kit with amp.
Special.
You know what was actually, it was Windows as well, actually.
Don't knock them, man. They're still churning them out.
I upgraded doing, because I'm left-handed, I upgraded doing SG. You don't do many left-handed guitars.
Classy choice, man.
It was a sheer availability and cost thing. So like, how did you think about, because the Telecaster you played?
Well, I mean, I had a bit of a misstep before the Telecaster.
Right.
I've got to be honest.
Misstep.
So I had this, nylon string classical guitar with a massive fat neck, which they have, where I learned on. But obviously couldn't entertain the notion of doing real bands with that guitar. It was just something to learn on. So I think for one Christmas, I was really into like I say, like indie rock and Britpop, but I also was really into like, a lot of classic rock, Zeppelin and Deep Purple and all that sort of stuff. So I persuaded my mum and dad to get us an Epiphone Les Paul Cherry Red.
Ooh, lovely.
Well, I mean, I suppose in some respects it is quite nice, but it felt very like the wrong choice very quickly,
right?
It's dead heavy.
So
it kind of like when you're used to just playing a very, very light classical guitar to go to this solid wood, dead heavy, and also it's so bright, man. Like the paint job on it is just it's like Rudolph's nose, isn't it?
I know which one you mean, because I've got a black and white Les Paul. Well, it's not Les Paul, it's an Epiphone, but same difference. It is a heavier guitar.
They're heavy, man, and so I learned quite quickly that it kind of wasn't really what I was really in the market for at the time, because not long after getting the electric guitar, we really started getting into the likes of Wire and Gang 4 and XTC and Devo and all these super shrill, wiry post-punk bands that have single coil pickups and crap amps and just really tinny gear. So the Telecaster was like it was an upgrade when it finally came along, but we'd definitely been playing Futureheads gigs for at least a year by the time I got the Telecaster, because all the early picks that I can recall, I'm definitely playing that Les Paul in the start of the band.
Still have it?
Oh, I've still got it. I've never sold an instrument.
Only guitar I've ever got rid of, I've got back, was to you when you learned, and you had to restring it upside down. So you had a left-hand guitar upside down.
One of the many painful things about you is your left-handedness.
Yeah,
that is quite contrary, isn't it? A left-handed guitar strung up for a right-handed person.
Yeah,
that was the budget option.
It was still strung. It's still strung right-handed as well.
This is
well, it's the other two guitars. Except my mum's actually. So. I will get off the guitars, I promise.
Oh, no.
But pedal-wise, like when did you decide to upgrade to pedals? Because when I started looking at pedals, the first thing I noticed was that's quite a cost for one sound.
Oh, yeah.
So by the end of it, because we came into like jobs when we were still in the band, I did have a nice little set of like delay and overdrive and tremolo and that. What made you decide your sounds?
Well, I mean... Well, actually, when we started the Heads, we had these a few little rules, and one of the rules was that there would be no effects.
All right.
So we would just plug in with a tuner.
Yeah, you should have said that to me with that delay pedal. We still don't know how to use it.
Anyone who knows a tuning pedal, I mean, it's quite expensive for really the purpose it serves. They are essential. So we had a tuner, and that was it. But prior to doing the heads, my first introduction of pedals was quite a weird one, because about 3 or 4 doors down in the street where I live with my mum and dad, there was a guy who moved in. And the first thing I noticed about this guy one day when he was cutting his grass was with his top off was that his entire body was covered in tattoos. So he had this enormous Japanese woman tattooed on his back. And in the street, everyone was like, "Who's this guy who's just moved in?" Sort of thing. And anyway, he must have seen us carrying a guitar in or out the house at some point. And we got talking one day about guitars. Turns out he was a guitarist as well. He was a porter in a morgue.
Right.
Kind of weird job. But he really loved playing guitar. And slowly but surely, he would acquire all this gear. So he'd be out there buying second-hand pedals, pedal boards, bits and bobs. And he would have no qualms about lending his gear or bringing gear around to my house for us to have a try of and stuff. Right. He was really, really generous and kind. Also a little bit odd, looking back. But it was a great introduction to very early Boss multi-effects board, I seem to remember. And then Boss Metal Zone pedal and OD1 and all these. It was definitely all second-hand gear, because thinking back now, it was probably late 80s stuff that he was borrowing me, lending me at the time. But it was a great introduction to different sounds, flanger, phaser, all that sort of stuff. But by the time we got to the heads, it was a rule. It was, I know that some bands have these manifestos and things, and for us it was quite helpful to have certain things that we would do and we wouldn't do. It kind of helped create a bit of a sound. And one of the rules was, at the beginning at least, no effects. And it wasn't until we made our second record really that we started using any kind of pedals. But on my even today on my pedal board's very, very basic. I do love effects and pedals, and I collect quite a lot of them. But my board's very simple. It's got a clone, and a kind of memory boy clone, all both made by a friend of mine, made by Mike Pedals, who's really good.
Right.
And we sometimes use a POG.
Oh yeah.
Which on the 4th Futureheads album you can hear quite a lot of. But really very basic setup. I have a Fender DeVille 4x12 amp, and the foot switch on that is, for me, that's basically.
Right. How long have you used that amp for?
Since first album Futureheads.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. That's cool.
Something you mentioned there, which I think would be interesting, when you're saying, talking about a band manifesto. What, if you remember, what's been in these sort of manifestos, whether it's Futureheads or other bands you've been in? I'm interested in what you've had in them and how important you think they are for a band to have, and what types of things you've thought, well, actually, really useful, or which things you thought, well, that was pointless. A bit on what they are and why a band or listeners might want to consider having one.
Well, I think every band, whether they sort of knowingly kind of sort of indulge in writing these rules out or not, I think every band kind of has their own little manifesto, or at least set of rules that they abide by. There's things that you would never do in your songwriting. But for us, we were quite kind of overt about it in the beginning, because really, in the beginning of the Futureheads, it didn't really feel like a band. It felt like we were just trying things out. Do you know what I mean? Having a bit of a daft laugh and seeing what almost quirks would be suited to us. So it was, like I said, certainly no effects pedals, no talking in between songs.
That sounds familiar.
No repeating any sections of the song more than once. So in the beginning, the first, 8, 10, 15 songs we wrote, there's one chorus, there's a verse, there's a chorus, there's another section after that. So there was no repetition in the songs, basically. And that was like a little challenge to us to see if we could do that. As far as I'm aware, that was the the bulk of the rules, really. I mean, Barry was always quite keen on there being a no jeans rule as well, because he was very fond of the suit trouser at the time. I mean, we are going back over 15 years here, but that didn't last as long as the other rules. It's a mere footnote.
Yeah.
But I do think that it helps construct a bit of an identity in the band. If you kind of make some very strict decisions in the beginning about what you will do and what you won't do. And for us, it was really helpful, because in terms of a sound, if you say that, okay, right, we're just plugging straight in. Like I say, I used that Fender DeVille, and Barry had some good gear at the time, but he chose to use an old Marlboro PA head and plug straight into that with a 2x15 cab, out of contrariness, basically, to try and get the most buzzy kind of chainsaw to your head guitar tone you could possibly have, and it worked for us, man. That really trebly sound. You'd turn up at gigs and the in-house sound engineer would be saying, "Oh, might want to turn your treble down," and everything else is turned down, and the treble's on maximum, and teenage kids getting really arsey straight off the bat, going, "That's the sound. That's what we're going for." I mean, Jeff, I know I'm rambling a bit now. Jeff, the bass player, who's 6'5", like a string bean, he chose to play a Fender Bronco short scale bass as well. Right, so he looked like a kind of giant playing a tennis racket, basically. And that was, again, I kind of don't know why, but that was part of his rule as well. He'd try and play the bass like it was a guitar, and sort of noodle on it rather than.
I suppose if anything, people will remember that more as well, like that a band with an identity, whether it is smart trousers or small guitars.
This is it.
Or very loud.
And I think, in a way, I don't think we ever really considered the audience as such. It wasn't a sort of... there was never that... And I know a lot of bands have these conversations. What shall we look like? What do we want to project? And it wasn't... Honest to God, it wasn't about that at this point, because as far as we were concerned, we were going to be playing to our 30 mates down the Royalty on Chester Road in Sunderland. And at the time, that was basically going to be it. But we just thought... This was in an era of Travis and the Stereophonics and Terrace and this sort of mid-Atlantic accent being on everything, and sort of no real identity to any British music, So for us, it was about just trying to be a little bit interesting, really.
And we're back.
Ta-da!
Ta-da! So, what was the first thing you want to mention, James?
I'm going to say the first thing is about the forming of the band bit.
Okay.
In the sense, I was interested that they went to this. That was a good start. I was interested. So they went to this place, the Bunker in Sunderland, that had a number of kids who just were interested in playing music, and they sort of formed lots of mini bands. I think it was, he said, and they got a lot of practice playing with different people.
Yeah, kind of changed it around every time, didn't it?
Yeah, and sort of over time, then knew who the people were that they were sort of whether they got on with best or they'd sort of
similar influences.
Yeah, interests or all the rest of it. They work better together or whatever it might be. I found that interesting. I mean, we didn't have anything like that. We just found the first sort of drummer and bass player that we knew, and sort of ran with it. At no point did we think, "Oh right, well, how about we try doing it with this group of people or these other two people or whatever."
Yeah.
So I found that interesting, that there was just that community, that set up, that thing that existed for them to try that.
Yeah, I think what we I want to mention after this as well, before this part, was what we had was, I mentioned in the interview, was Chris, who put some drums to our early demos, if you will.
Well, that's actually a very good point. Yeah, before
Rob really joined.
Rob.
Because Chris was in a band at the time, wasn't he?
So he
was quite successful.
He was never going to be our drummer, but he sort of helped us before we formed our band to
like give it some.
But it did come alive. I think you said in the interview at the time that the first time that we went from you playing a guitar and me singing to then someone else adding something to it, it was a bit of a wow moment. It was like, that sounds like a proper song now.
Yeah, and it did.
That was an exciting thing.
It was, and that's the song that kind of that was the first song we did as a band. But yeah, we had Chris and we had Dave, because Dave was quite good at, like, he wasn't the musical side of it, but he was our older mate. Everyone's got an older mate, Dave, and he kind of like directed it and like, just go for it.
Yeah,
and like he listened to us and went, you know what, that actually sounds pretty good. It's not.
And it probably sounded awful at the time, but there was bits.
There was bits, and there was like, enthusiasm.
Yeah, you know what? Someone to give a prod of encouragement.
That bunker that Ross was talking about sounded really good, because at school we only really had the choir. Like a lot of people do have the choir.
Did we have a choir?
At our school, yeah, they did performances.
The only thing I remember from school, music-wise, was playing "Oh When the Beans Come Out the Tin" on a piano.
Oh my god!
Or a keyboard.
We didn't progress much from that.
Well, my keyboard playing certainly didn't progress much from that moment. Yeah, but I know what you mean, though.
Yeah,
I guess for anyone listening, because again at this point, this is the third episode going out. We don't yet know exactly who our audience will be, whether it's going to be people who are just thinking about starting out as being a musician, or people who have been a musician for a while, or people who just love music and like to hear about the stories, journeys of other people.
Yeah, I'll ask the question why not as well if you're in that.
Yeah, I think if you're on the first of those categories of just thinking about getting together, then, like you say, that thing happened. It was a point in time in Sunderland. As you said, there could be lots of these things. I mean, I don't know, but a quick sort of internet search these days, and I'm sure it's one way. You know, the way we did it worked perfectly well for us. We found a couple of people
like-minded.
And stuck with them, and that was our core that we made music together.
And as we said, I don't think Simon to this point knew he was the bass player for the first 6 months at least.
But then ultimately was probably the more naturally gifted of all of us.
And he was the best looking one.
A low bar.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
If me and Rob are on that playground, it's a low bar. But yeah, my point was that we kind of gravitated towards each other, and that may have happened organically.
Yeah. But I think there's a couple of options there. You know, if you're looking for other people, it might be that you just find people that you know and say, we don't have a bass player, will you pick up a bass and learn the bass? That's a thing that happens. Lots of people will just be like, right, someone who wants to be involved but doesn't currently play something will just pick up and learn the instrument that's missing from the band or whatever it might be. Whereas another option could be finding in your local area, if there's any like-minded people who want to sort of start these like mini groups week on week and just collaborate and see if there's anything that works, and if not, try with other people the next week and the next week. It seemed like quite a good way of going about doing it. Yeah, that ties into the next bit, I think.
Well, actually, can I just quickly jump back? The first thing I was going to say was from a guitarist, the learning the guitar bit was interesting to me.
Well, that's what I was saying. It sort of ties into that next bit of the learning side of things.
Yeah, because that story was familiar to me. I learned actually on Michael, my stepdad's guitar, upside down, because I'm, as if you may know, left-handed.
Yes, you are.
It was about 10 months or so I learned upside down, and the only thing I learned really was to get a feel for the weight of a guitar, how to hold a guitar and play a few chords, knowing I'll get one that's the right way around for me.
When you first got your first proper...
That was the red SG.
Yeah. How much did you come into that with a preconceived notion of, right, I now know what I want because of my experience playing other instruments versus, well, I just want that particular guitar because I've seen someone else.
There's a couple of things about that,
and they looked awesome. Or I really love that band and they play them. Therefore, I want.
That's one of them. Brian Maloko from Placebo plays an SG. Well, he used to. Well, he did a couple of times anyway. Kevin from school had an SG, and the only SG they're doing left-handed Epiphone is the one I bought. Unless you wanted it any other one, any other colours, it was a fortune.
So does that change? So when you go into the local music store, for example, because I guess in Ross's case, what he perhaps didn't do was go in and play a whole load of guitars, try them, hold them, until he found the one that was right for him. He sort of went, I fancy that one.
Well, and Les Paul's a lovely guitar, but it is heavy as hell.
Yeah. So there's maybe a bit of a learning curve in terms of doing that, but maybe it's a bit trickier for the likes of yourself.
Yeah. I would definitely recommend going in and finding the guitar that A, feels right, looks right, and plays right. A lot of people will talk about actions and how far the string is from the neck and all that technical stuff, which is great stuff. The best way to figure out what you want is to pick a guitar up and play around with a couple, because whoever you go to buy guitars will want to sell, and they'll let you play for a couple of. I bet they'll let you play for an hour if you wanted to. If you've got the intention to buy one. Yeah, I didn't have much of a choice beside. I think I even had to order the SG in as well. It wasn't in the shop, and there wasn't many options. But right-handed guitars, there's loads of them, and it's like, for me, if you think of a Noel Gallagher guitar, like the semi-acoustic one, like the Union Jack style one, not the actual colours, but the actual frame, that was just too big for me. I thought it looked clunky, even though it was Noel Gallagher. I thought, I don't really want your guitar. But when he plays a Les Paul, I like the look of them. I'm getting too technical on the guitars here, but it is something to think about.
Well, it is, yeah, because I always thought, like, from watching the Beatles, I'd love a Rickenbacker, because that looks...
Yeah, but you just got to go and look at the price of a Rickenbacker.
Well, exactly. I was never going to buy one, certainly in the early days, because, they just cost far too much, which is probably a good thing. Otherwise, if they'd been a little bit cheaper, I maybe would have made a rash purchase on something that I really didn't need, because one, I wasn't the guitarist, and two, like, having a half-decent acoustic guitar to just play around with was the far better choice for...
Yeah, but Simon, when he bought his Rick, we were at a point of that when we were playing a fair few gigs, and we were really pushing on at that next phase of, this isn't just, we've tried it for 6 months.
Yeah. He
committed to that Rickenbacker, which wasn't cheap, but it forced us to practice more, play more, gig more. It looked better, it sounded better, and I think that was for him, I'm speaking on his behalf here, but I've had a conversation about it. It kind of jumped him to the next bit of like, this is real now. I'm not playing on me £100. There's nothing wrong with £100 bass, and they're still expensive.
But there was a point, yeah. I think that's
a tipping point. That's when I went to my Les Paul as well. It became
logical to make that upgrade. Because I remember him saying, obviously, just the ability for him to move his hands across the frets and the strings. It was a much smoother process than on these original. I
can't remember what that was actually. Yeah,
it was far better.
It's a bold commitment,
but there would have been pointless buying that on day one.
Oh yeah,
it just would have been unnecessary.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So that whole thing about the starting to learn the guitar, it is quite a personal thing when you start to learn. Sticking with it, getting good, meeting other people, like-minded people. Yeah, that bloke who lent them stuff as well.
Pedals. That was the next bit that I found interesting. That they sort of had a no pedal rule. I wasn't expecting that.
That was the no pedal rule. There's no problem with it either way. They're expensive for a start, but with a pedal on your amp to go from basically clean to distorted, it might be enough, and it was for them. But
it depends what you're looking to do and why you want a particular sound, I guess. I mean, you didn't have the variety of pedals that you had on day one.
No. I think I had one which I acquired somehow. Still not too sure.
But then equally, I think there was probably a point where you went from, and it wasn't an overnight. You'd sort of built them incrementally, but there was a point where you then had the full set. Where I think we could have fallen into the sort of trap of, I need to use a pedal on this song.
Yeah, I just basically used overdrive for a lot of them. But one of the main reasons I like the pedals, it kind of gives you a broader palette, you may say. Someone might, I don't know. I would probably.
You just did.
I just threw it out there. But my point is, it kind of like, it gives you a few more options on the different songs, and what you can What it can do is it can make you overplay them, as in, what can I do with a delay pedal today? Or if you don't have the pedals, you might get into a trap.
Sometimes I have night tremors about your delay pedal.
Me too.
I try to go to sleep and I just hear it.
What you could do, if you don't have a pedal, even just one, everything can sound the same.
Yeah.
It's got
But it just shows the Futureheads were an extremely successful band, and pedals were not a thing for them.
Literally a manifesto.
Whereas other bands would have 1,000,001 of them and equally can be successful. So no, that was interesting. But I like the manifesto, and I think Ross was right in that whether they're sort of actually written down or whether it's just something that you talk about. That bands tend to have these things one way or another. One of the bits I like that Ross says, they sort of go into a practice session feeling like they owe each other something. You really need to sort of give a level of commitment, which I sort of quite liked.
Yeah.
But I did find it fascinating that the whole going into how they practiced. So on the one hand, a lot of it was similar to us, that have sort of like a 3 or a 4 hour session once or twice a week. And it was like, oh, right, that's sort of what we did. But it kind of, that's how it sort of played out, in the sense that you've only got so much spare time generally.
Yeah.
If you've got a job or you're studying or whatever, it's not like you're going to practice 7 hours every single day, because it's not your full-time job yet.
Yeah.
So that sort of kind of made sense, I guess. But then the big thing, I know the two of us were like, really like that whole 5-second section.
We practiced a set, didn't we, really? And then we would spend some time learning new songs or creating new songs. Well,
it depended, didn't it? Because if we were in the middle of playing a load of live shows, or if we were about to go and play shows elsewhere, then we'd just like sort of relentlessly practice the set list for however many hours to get that as tight as possible.
Yeah, I suppose we did the same when we had a recording session coming up. We'd just hammer those 4 songs or whatever.
Yeah. Whereas if we were just writing new stuff, then we could. Because I think you maybe mentioned that there was some times where we try and get from a bridge to a chorus, or like from an intro, or how we're going to do the end of this song, and would maybe do that sort of 30 seconds over and over again. But to go to a 5-second bit, and
I thought about that, and
it's a way of doing it.
His way of doing it, and I liked it. Well, I didn't think of it, I must admit.
Well, I don't know if it would necessarily work.
But I think it works for their sound. If you think about what a lot of harmonising they do, and there's a lot of intricate bits. Whereas
I feel like as soon as you'd started, you'd be finishing. I don't know. I'd need more of a flow to get into that part. I don't know. I feel like I'd need a good 10 seconds before and after to see how the 5-second bit
sounded.
Maybe they did that.
But really, this part of the interview, a lot of it was talking about him getting started, the band getting started, and then just progressing to the next step.
One of the bits that I loved was, which made us laugh, because this totally happened, was how we communicate ideas to other members of the band. Yeah. When you did the whatever random bit of whatever Blondie song you were trying to describe, and that it was just like I was back in the practice room where I was like, the bit of a song. And the amount of times we did that to Simon and Rob, I mean, particularly to Rob, because I guess with Simon, certainly you'd be able to say, oh, can you play this chord, or like do whatever.
There's notes
to Rob, the amount of times that we just
he should have just been better.
He should have just read our mind and played. It is a thing though, and
that can make or break bands though, because if you can't communicate to each other in a jokey way or a sarcastic way or a professional way without falling out with each other, as in, tell me what you want me to hit on these drums, Ben. You never really had that conversation, did we?
Because most of the time it was just comical, but I can well imagine with certain bands, if it's at a pressure point where you need to record a song by this date, or you need to get this sorted by whatever time and the pressure's on or whatever, and it's like, no, just play it like dum dum dum, and there's someone go, what do you mean? But I think there's definitely something in terms of just making sure you've got an environment where you can do that in the right sort of way.
And I think once we started to get to know each other's ways a bit more, towards the middle part of our writing of songs, that definitely became easier.
Yeah, because sometimes we'd sort of play another song that we were thinking of and then say, oh, a bit like that. And then Rob would play exactly that. And we're like, oh no, that's not actually what we want at all.
Exactly.
It's like, yeah, but it sounds in that song. He's like, yeah, because there's all these other things going on in this song that you've listened to, which make it sound like that.
Which I think
just the drum
probably fits with what Ross was saying about those 5-second chunks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was another bit that Ross mentioned. He said that they didn't necessarily think about the audience much in terms of. So it was off the back of talking about the whole manifesto bit and Genes. He said, a lot of bands look at how they present themselves and all the rest of it, whereas that was never really much of a thing to them, because initially they were just going to be playing to their mates down the local sort of thing. They never really had that end vision of this is how we're going to be presented to the world sort of thing, which was sort of interesting, because I think many people getting into being a musician initially might just start out as a hobby and then they get reasonable at it and then it snowballs from there. Whereas we've got a later episode coming up where we talk about fans and fandom, which sort of comes at it from the other angle to think about all these things.
Yeah.
And again, I think that'll be interesting as a link to that episode, to go through, here's the various things that you might want to think about that a lot of people probably don't when they suddenly start to take their hobby a bit more seriously.
Yeah. So, yeah, you're totally right. I think thinking of the audience is very interesting, but I would also, coming soon on a future episode, two the double header, great episodes about fandom and fans.
So I think we've covered a fair bit of stuff there, and we are only just halfway through our time with Ross. So next week we'll continue with Ross for part 2, where we move on to jamming sessions, record deals, and being allowed to fail.
We've reached the end of this week's episode of Anyone Can Play Guitar podcast.
Big thank you for tuning in, and remember to stop by iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts from and subscribe so that you never miss an episode.
While you're there, it would be amazing if you could leave a rating and a review.
All the show notes can be found at www.acpgmusic.com, and if you want to get in touch,
email us your questions, any feedback and any suggestions to info@acpgmusic.com.
That's it for now. Keep supporting upcoming artists,
and we'll catch you next time.